First off, I just want to give a kind of a brief introduction to the company. For those of you familiar with Shippable, if you're a current existing user of our products, then you probably are familiar with our background and our story. For those of you new to Shippable, we're a startup company based in Seattle, Washington. We have an office also in Bangalore, India. We were founded in 2013, so we're hitting about our 2.5-year anniversary right now. And we are a funded company. We've got 24 people across the globe. The mission for Shippable is pretty simple. It's to make the complex problem of building, testing, and deploying software frictionless. It's to eliminate as much waste and delay in the process as possible, and to ultimately help our customers enable automated software delivery pipelines. Most of the people who start using Shippable come to us with a pretty common business problem, which is that their software delivery processes are deemed too slow for the current pace of their business, and they're continually asked this question: are you too slow? Why are you too slow? Why can't you deliver faster? I have a simple change. Why can't I get it faster? The other reasons they come and start to use Shippable is that they believe that they're spending too much time in the software delivery process. With their developers spending time on activities they don't consider to be value-added activities. They're not related to, directly related to building value into the software products that are under development. They're instead spent provisioning machines or manually running tests or installing software, and they want those we call non-value-added activities taken out of their life and automated and provided for directly by a tool. And lastly, people often they hear about companies that supposedly do it right, and they ship continuously, many times a day, or at least every single day, where they're committing and shipping and deploying code into their environments and all the way into production on a daily basis. And they want to know how they can do so as well, because they know if it's possible for others to do it, then they should be able to. And that tends to be the next, compelling question that they face, which is, there are other people out there who talk about doing this and they present on this, so why can't we? And the reason why it's so difficult is that it starts with a very simple problem. It starts with, how long does it take to make a small change to an application? But that becomes a more complex problem when you ask, how long does it take me to make that change and get it to the customer through all of our processes and all of our environments and all of our tests in order to get into the hands and usable by a customer? And it becomes an exponential problem when you start to add in more complexities to the problem, with more developers, more components in your application, or more environments that you have to move through. And so this is ultimately where Shippable comes in, and Shippable will help you manage all of this complexity and enable you to set up these end-to-end pipelines from source code through continuous integration and continuous delivery, through your image registry, which is a concept that may be new to some of you on the call today, which I'll talk about a little later, through Shippable Formations in this case, which is our dev and test labs, all the way into production. And so Shippable, in a nutshell, is a DevOps 2.0 platform that makes continuous delivery a reality without DevOps code. So it eliminates environmental inconsistencies across all of your environments, and it reduces lab footprint with hosted and dev and test labs, so you do not have to maintain these yourself. Well, this is a build slide, and my build doesn't seem to be working, so let me see if that will work. Nope, it's not. So I'm going to have to just explain this slide instead. The idea of DevOps 2.0 for us is a fairly straightforward one. It is the idea that trying to enable those automated pipelines is a difficult problem, and it's one that many people have talked about for quite a few years now. It's been probably, I'd say, 5 years that we've been hearing the term DevOps, and it correctly recognized the problem, which was that delivery process was too slow. And what people effectively recognized was that it wasn't often the software development process that had gotten too slow. Most people have addressed that with some sort of an agile approach But it was the handoffs from development to operations. It was in the way that multiple environments are very inconsistent, and it's very difficult to get software running consistently across all of those environments, and it just takes a lot of effort to deploy software, to provision machines, to install all of the necessary dependencies, and to get them all working properly, and get things into production. And so for us, what we've decided is that one of the reasons why it's taken so long for DevOps to truly take hold, and it's kind of suffered in the media recently from the belief that it's not reaching the promise that that people thought it was supposed to provide. It's that there needs to be a real understanding about how to automate that pipeline, how to eliminate the handoffs between development and operations, how to get the two groups working together as effectively as possible, and ultimately how to get as much automation in that process with as little effort as possible. And in the end, what that ultimately requires is that there's a clear delineation of duties between the development activities, and by development activities we don't necessarily mean just developers, we mean anybody involved in the development activities of the organization. That could be a DevOps person, it can be an ops person, or it can be a developer who's involved in the development activities. And those we really summarize as as two primary requirements to be able to accomplish this in a DevOps 2.0 world. One is that you do have the goal and you do achieve continuous delivery without the use of DevOps code, and by that we mean without the use of separate infrastructure or separate tools where you write a significant amount of code in order to, or any code for that matter, in order to deliver and install your applications into the environments where they're going to run. Secondly, we think that means that you have to have smart containerized environments. Containers certainly appear to have been an incredibly hot topic for the last couple of years, and rightfully so. They are proving to be the absolute future of IT. They're incredibly easy to manage and easy to spin up and fast and effective. And by smart we mean that you have environments set up that are auto-updating and recognize changes in the environment and are ready for and are automatically deployed or one-click deployed by your team into those environments without having to write that code. And that means on the operational infrastructure side of the equation, you end up with a situation where if you're truly doing DevOps 2.0, your operations team now has the primary responsibility of running that decoupled infrastructure and of making sure that the data center is up and available. And by decoupled infrastructure, we mean that your tools and your DevOps 2.0 environment is orchestrated in such a way that the infrastructure itself is abstracted away from the applications. The applications run on top of an infrastructure and are, for the most, and are actually, what's the right word I'm looking for? The infrastructure is invisible to those applications other than to look like a single machine. So regardless of the complexity of the data center itself, regardless of how many different servers you have behind the scenes, whether they're physical, whether they're virtual, whether they're in the cloud, whether they're on premises, they look to your applications as if they're just a single server sitting there for the application to run on. And so everything to do with the complexity and the differences of all of those machines and all the hardware is decoupled from those applications. So in software engineering today, you typically see a life cycle that follows a fairly standard approach like this, where you go through a development process in development environments, you go into a pre-production process with either QA environments or integration or staging or test, whatever you want to call those. And lastly, things get deployed into production environments where they're operated and run, and end users use the applications. The problem ends up being when you see the way software engineering today functions is that many of the pieces along that life cycle are actually owned and split up between the responsibilities of those with the development responsibilities and those with operational responsibilities. And you end up having many handoffs throughout the process. You've got delays built into the process as software code, for instance, needs to be prepared and handed off into, to be deployed into different environments, and then it may go through various validation checks, it may go through change control review boards, it may go through many steps and milestones along the way that essentially gate the process and make it difficult to move software quickly all the way into that end user state where users can get access to it. And as a result of all that complexity and difficulty, people have created many, many tools, lots of processes, a lot of people. They throw at the problem to try and speed up that process in order to manage all that complexity and all those handoffs. Now, with Shippable, we've evolved this, and we think it's going to be an exciting change for anybody who takes on Shippable as to help them with automating these pipelines. But we help you create those automated deployment pipelines that span all the way across your dev and test environments and prepare everything for delivery into production environments, and can even deploy into your production environments as well. And the key difference here, of course, becomes that we eliminate the handoffs in the dev and test portions of the life cycle. And so the development organization, and again, like I said earlier, that could be developers and operational folks, but those responsible for development activities of software code can now handle all of the activities necessary to create the code, to build the code, integrate it into their source control, and to push it into their test environments for full topology testing. And so with Shippable 3.0, ultimately, we want you to be able to easily build, validate, and deploy Docker-based applications into full topology environments without writing any DevOps code. And how that looks overall with our product line is that the Shippable platform consists of two products, continuous integration and formations. And these two products link together the lifecycle from source code through CI, through into image registries, using any of the image registries that you may want to use, whether that's Docker Hub or Google Container Registry or any private registry, into formations, which is our dev and test clouds. These are multi-container environments that, as I mentioned on the previous slide, are easily configured by developers and DevOps teams to not require DevOps code, to be able to deploy code, to configure the environments, and run full topology applications. These are fully persistent environments, so they're your dev and test labs. They're always there, and you can spin them up, you can spin them down, you can roll back, you can auto deploy, you can roll back with one click. We're going to go into that in detail in the demonstration. And then of course, at the conclusion of all those activities, to make it easy to push those into your production environments. And so, to summarize then, in terms of the key benefits of what you're going to see with Shippable 3.0, you're going to be able to create these deployment pipelines that automate your development workflows. You're going to be able to create Docker-based applications without actually having to learn Docker. There's nothing you'll need to necessarily learn or know about Docker in order to start doing this. You can deploy or roll back any combination of any of your software component versions to any environment with a single click, and again, with no code. And you can run full topology environments at a fraction of the cost of AWS. I think I missed that on the previous slide, but I think you saw here our pricing plans. For formations, we price it per container, and you can think of a container really as a machine, as a virtual machine that is running an application. It comes with an IP address and works very similar to the way a virtual machine works. And we charge $7 per container for a 1-core 512 megabytes of RAM container. We will be rolling out multiple sizes of containers here shortly, but our goal is to always be a fraction of the cost of AWS, roughly 50% less than you would pay at Amazon for equivalent compute. On the CI portion, the pricing there is that the first build container on Shippable is always free, so if your needs only require a single build process and continuous integration process to be running simultaneously at the same time, then you'd never need anything other than our free plan. We provide one of the great new elements of Shippable 3.0 for our existing customers is that we have now included all of the CI functionality, including the Docker functionality for pulling Docker images, for creating Docker images, and for pushing Docker images. We've included all of that in the free plan, and now the exact same functionality that's available in our paid plans is now fully available in our free plans. But for those who need more power in their build processes, because they've got larger teams, they need to be able to run build simultaneously and have multiple developers be able to check in code and run build at the same time. You have any amount of scalability that you require is available, and those just come at $10 per additional build container that will run in your environment. So let's jump to the demonstration. I think we can move over here. I'm going to get rid of this off my screen. And what you're looking at right now is the Shippable dashboard. This is the main landing page. And oh, you just saw something happen there. There was a build running for Shippable, and it just completed, and it moved into the build history section. But on this dashboard, you can get an understanding for some of the key elements of Shippable. You can see the products that we talked about before, the continuous integration product, the formations product, and then there's a product called Lighthouse that I didn't mention on the slides, but we're going to go and dive into that here in a short bit as well. It allows you to identify images that exist, whether they're ones that your organization manages and created or ones that are maintained anywhere in any public registry that you have access to. And it allows you to monitor changes to those images and be notified when those images change. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. So here on what we're looking at here is the Shippable main landing page, which focuses on the build and the CI product. You can see here, when I click on the CI module here, I get access to any organization that I'm currently a member of in my source code repositories, and we support multiple source code systems. They need to be Git-based, but you can see here that well, you'll see here in a second that I'm currently logged in with my GitHub account, and Shippable doesn't maintain any of its own authentication. We leverage the authentication of your source code system to manage all access to everything in Shippable, including the all elements of the build system. So what you're looking at here on this dashboard is a history of all the current builds that have run in the, this is the last 20 builds that have run in Shippable. You can see that they span multiple projects. So here I've got the Shippable API project that has recently run 3 successive builds. So 3 different folks have committed changes. Actually, if you look at this, there was pull requests that were issued, and our system pull requests will automatically trigger a CI run inside of Shippable, and that will notify the owner of that branch that CI has been executed, and it will tell it about success, so that it can then come and push that code and merge that code into the master branch. And then you can see on this branch we had a commit happen that triggered CI, and it ran CI. It took 2 minutes to run the entire run, and completed with success. If we click on one of these, and I mentioned to mention here, you can also see that all of the projects that you have access to or participate in will all be accessible to you through this CI dashboard. So here you can see is our project for our www repo in Shippable. If we go off the screen, you can see we've done a lot of work overnight. You can go off the screen. You can see some of the ones from my personal projects as well. So here's one from the demo we'll be going through today, and then I can easily filter to only see the ones that. Oops, looks like I didn't have any on that first page. So I can easily filter these to see to narrow down to just the ones that I want to see on my screen at the same time. So one of the things that you'll see when we run through an actual build is when you check in code with Shippable, your builds automatically trigger based on that check into your source code repository. So it's part of the automation process that we don't want activities to have to be manually triggered. And so Shippable is once you enable Shippable against your source code repo, we are always watching that repository. As soon as any changes are checked into that repo, it will automatically trigger a continuous integration build and unit test process over here in Shippable. And you can see here I've got 2 branches that are currently active in my WW2 project, and it's showing up here at the top a summary of the last completed build for each of those 2 branches. And down below, just like on the previous page, I can see the build history for this particular project going all the way back, and I can go all the way back in history as long as I want. Some of the elements on here is that at any time, besides the automatic triggering of builds that happens on check-in to a repo, I can come into here and I can just trigger a manual build of this branch if I'd like. And so, in fact, I can kick that off right now here with a manual build. It takes me to the build screen, and at this point, I'm now watching the activity of an individual build as it happens. And so right now, this has been queued up to be started in the process, and now it's already kicked off on the shippable system. And now, behind the scenes, what it has done is it has spun up a build system dedicated to your particular CI run. It is now going through all the necessary steps to prepare that system with all the dependent software and everything necessary to test your code. It's going to do a git sync against your repo. It's going to pull all of that code in to your environment, or into this build environment we create for you. And it's then going to execute any unit tests or any other activities that you'd like, that you've instructed Shippable to run to validate that your code is acceptable and passes. And so in this particular case, you can watch, in fact, and see the streaming of all the activity that's happening behind the scenes while this happens. You're getting a variety of different pieces of information about each of your builds as well. I can cancel this build anytime I'd like just by clicking the cancel button here, or in fact, I can choose to rerun this exact same build at a later time, at any time. And so if I go back, for instance, into my project while that one's running, first of all, I can see that now my dashboard has changed. It's now showing me my processing build here in the middle. But you can see for any historical build that's out there, I can go back and I can decide to go back and rerun that particular build, and it will use the details of your system of that particular build that existed at that particular time. In order to, I want to show you a few things about setting up a project to be able for continuous integration. You heard me mention when we were looking at the slides that we've now enabled all of our Docker functionality that used to be only available in our dedicated hosts product. It is now available to everybody on the CI product in any plan, the free plan or any of the paid plans. And it no longer requires the use of a dedicated host. In the past, we needed customers to provide their own hardware in order to do Docker functionality like Docker build, but now that is all provided natively on the platform to you. And so for this particular project, the Radar WW2 project, you can see that I've got Docker build turned on. So it is looking at a Docker file inside my repository, and it's using that to build the image, to build my image for my CI run. You can also see here that we give you 2 choices on how you can use Docker build. Some of our customers, when we first rolled out the Docker build functionality, they came back to us and they said, you know, this is great, but I want to also have the option of not only building an image to use for my CI process, but at the end of that process, upon success, I want to be able to give you a different set of instructions to build a image that extracts out all of the test artifacts from it, so that when the image I create to deploy into my future environments like production, I don't want to have all the overhead of those test artifacts, and so I want to have be able to take those out. And so we added that functionality in where you get that choice. You can build an image at the beginning of your CI process, and that same image can be pushed to Docker Hub if that's what you prefer, or you can choose to build a second image at the conclusion of your run upon success that will build any other image that you'd like, the most common use case being that you get rid of all your test artifacts and then push that final image. You can see here that I'm choosing to push the image that I build out to Docker Hub, and I've got my repository out here on Docker Hub listed that I want to push it to. I'm using a default tag to push. I've got multiple options here. I can use the commit information from GitHub or Bitbucket or any of those source code repositories. I can use that as my tag when I push that image to Docker Hub, or I can use my default tag, which the default tag will always tag with the branch name and the build number. Or I can provide a custom tag exactly as I'd like. And then here you can see I've specified that this particular CI build is using a base image that starts from one that Shippable provides. That's a Ubuntu 14.04 image with Node.js. Shippable provides an entire library of base images that you can start from, and they make the installation and getting started of your build system incredibly easy. You don't have to search for these or include them in any of your build instructions, and they're just available. And then you can also see here there was an option I skipped over called Lighthouse, and it basically says, do I want to be notified when this project image is updated? And I've turned this on, and you'll notice that when we go over and look at the Lighthouse product later, you'll see that I'm now set up to be notified anytime somebody makes a change to this image. And since I've set up this image to push automatically from the CI process, it means that on every successful CI process that runs on this project, it will push a new image into Docker Hub, and I will be notified via email or any notification. I happen to have email set up. You can see here I'm using my Docker Hub integration, and I do have the option to encrypt any environmental variables that are in my shippable YAML file so that they're not visible to anybody else. So let's take a jump back out to the process. We'll see that the build has completed. The CI run was a success, and as a result of that success, we should now be able to go see that a image has been pushed to my Docker Hub registry with an image tag of 30. Now I could go all the way out to Docker Hub to see that, but instead I'm going to go jump out to Lighthouse and show you Lighthouse. So I mentioned Lighthouse as a way to watch image repositories and be notified when they change, and we were just looking at T-Trahan right here. It looks like it's actually still, there's 26 tags associated with out there in the repo, and there you can see the master.30, the one that we just ran, was pushed out and is now available in Docker Hub, and I can now see that in Lighthouse as well. And because I have email notifications set up, you can see that I can go back over to my email and I'll see that it is now showing up in email. Looks like we've got a request to increase the zoom on this page, and that's a good point. I forgot that I had zoomed that down yesterday for something else I was doing. Does that look a little better? Great. Okay, then let's keep going. And so because I have notifications set up here, and I chose to set up email notifications, you can set up any type of notification here. So you can do IRC, you can do Slack, there's Campfire, there's multiple notification types you can use to be notified about any changes. But if I go out here and take a look at my, I can see here I just received an email from Shippable that told me that the image was just updated, and now I can go in and take whatever action I want to as a result of that change. And so Lighthouse essentially allows you to set up that view into any image registry repository out there and be able to get access to what's available in that repository in terms of all the tags, but also to be notified. I mean, and it's not just for the ones that you can see. There's ones here that I'm personally managing, but I'm also set up here to go ahead and see the Google Node.js public repo out on Docker Hub, and I'm getting the same access that I have for those other ones. You can see on this one I don't yet have Lighthouse email notifications turned on, but if I decide to turn that on, I'm now going to be notified anytime anybody pushes a new image to the Google Node.js public repository on Docker Hub. So one of the real key elements of the shippable system is the idea of these automated pipelines from end to end. And you saw before we talked about that means from source code check-in all the way through continuous integration, through image registries, and then being able to deploy those into dev and test environments where you can perform any amount of testing you want to perform on your applications. And so let's dive into formations where that fourth step in the process is happening, and you can see that in action. And so what I've got here is my formations dashboard page. Again, if you remember from the slide, formations in the shippable system are multi-container environments. And so think about today when you deploy any of your applications. Let's say you've got a simple multi-tier environment, maybe a 3-tier application that you run each tier on its own server. And so you generally would probably be deploying that into 3 virtual machines today, and then creating all of the networking, creating the security, installing all the dependencies on those machines, going through all the necessary steps to get each of the software components running on each of their respective servers, and making sure that they can communicate with each other. Well, with a shippable formation, you get all of that same functionality leveraging containers, and you get to set all of that up with nothing more than a few configuration settings in the UI. And so there's no provisioning of machines. There's no code required to install software or install dependencies. All networking is easily handled in the user interface as well. And you have a tremendous amount of flexibility. As I mentioned before, these are dedicated, persistent environments. They're not shared by anyone else, they're not transient. I didn't mention on the build system, but on the build system, when your builds are required, it spins up a new build system, a new container for you. It executes all of your builds, and upon success, it saves all of the results back into the central database, and then it shuts down that build container, and then the next time you need one, it's going to restart a new build process and execute it. It caches very smartly, but it is a transient process that comes up and down. With formations, these are all persistent processes, and these are all persistent environments. And so what you're looking at here, just to give you a quick summary of what I've set up here, is I have an account, a subscription set up with Shippable right now for 50 containers. So I'm able to run 50 containers. I'm only using 9 of those right now. You can see I've got 4 environments set up that I've deployed my applications across, and in those environments, I actually currently have 3 services, and they're all currently active inside those environments. And I'll explain what that means here by diving into the actual environments and services themselves. So what you see here on this page are actually the environments that I've set up, and so you can think about this to be any combination of, or it's really any instance of deployment that you want to set up with any combination of your software components, any combination of services that you've established. It's entirely in your control. And so you can think of this very traditionally as, for instance, of having a dev, test, and prod environment. In this particular instance, I've set up an environment called all-in-one. I've got another one called dev. I've got another one called dev, arrow, test, API, current, and I've got a 4th one called test. And I've got these 4 different ones set up to kind of show some of the different ways that that formations provide you a tremendous amount of flexibility and power to manage your development pipeline process. So, for instance, my test process internally, this is the place where I've always got my latest formally approved application code for my integration test environment. So this is where, as a team, all of the latest versions of each of my components are deployed, and this is where I run all of my end-to-end integration testing as a team. And you can see in this particular example, my API service, I've got a single instance of that running, and my www service, I've got that load balanced with 3 instances running on the front end. Over here, you can see the version numbers of the images that I've been deployed. So you can see my Docker Hub repo here of T-Tray Radar API 2. You can see the tag that I've decided to deploy, which is the master.19 image. And you can also see the internal port that's been exposed for this, and the external address because this has been externally exposed as well. And likewise, the same information here for my web layer. And so you can see with this particular one, this is my web address out on Amazon, and if I jump out, you can actually see that's this address here. And if I go ahead and refresh this, you'll see this is a running application on my formation, and this is an application here that I can. Oops, 1 second. Whoops. So I'm out here, and this is a fully deployed instance of my application. It's running multiple components. It's 4 machines running here, 3 on the web front end, 1 on the API layer, and it's actually just a mini demo application that we've created that goes and queries a GitHub repository and gives us back the status of the issues on that repository. So that's an example where I've got a load balanced service. I'm running my services independently, so each service runs on its own. And you can see I've got versions 19 and 17 respectively on each of those services. Stepping up, you can see my dev environment is a very similar concept, but in my dev environment, I've only deployed a single service for each, and you can see I've deployed later versions of those services. And I'm currently doing testing on later versions, on really the latest versions of this, because you can also see that, particularly for this www, I've got auto deploy set up, and you can see, remember, we built master.30 earlier in the CI system. It's already been deployed out here into my dev environment without me having to have done anything, because I have auto deploy set up, and it's now running out there as well. And if I go check out this address, 32.131. I'll spin that up here on this other app, and you can see once again it's another fully functioning dev environment and test environment running that I can access, and I can run any of my integration tests against, and it's fully persistent out there. And you can see, if you noticed on the last one, an older version of this was going against the default repository was a shippable support repository, and you can see now I've spun up a later version. I've decided to change that repository to be docs v2 and to default to a range of 0 to 3. One other thing you'll notice here, on this particular version it says GitHub issue radar dev mode. On this other one, it didn't. As you'd imagine, that's because I'm using environment variables, and we're going to dive into the setup of a formation right now, and we're going to take a look at how you can use environment variables to control the behavior of your various environments. Before I do that, I want to talk about two other types of environments that I've set up here. This one I've called all-in-one. You can see, in fact, I've got the exact same application running, but instead of running each service independently in its own separate services that can be separately managed and separately load balanced and provided with separate and essentially manage the instances independently. In these, I've got both containers of both components of my application running inside of a single service. They are likewise the exact same application, completely accessible just like the others. In this case, I happen to be running them under a single service, which means I'm always going to deploy them, bring them up, bring them down, and manage them as a group. So if I decide to create multiple instances of the all-in-one service, I'm going to actually be creating multiple instances of each of my application components inside of this service, versus in my test environment below, I'm able to manage the instances of the API service and the www service independently. It's entirely a choice up to you, the developer. And the last thing I want to point out here is this dev with straight to the test, pointing to the test API current environment. This is actually an example where, as a developer, I've made changes to my www project. I've deployed that image. Again, you can see I had auto deploy set up, so this one is automatically deployed master.30. But in fact, you can see there is no API service running here, and there's no API service as part of this environment. But if I go access that application, you'll see I'm still running that application. And the reason is that you'll see in the configurations later is that I've actually set up this service to point to this API that's over in my test environment. So what I can do as an individual developer who's working on a single component, and I've got changes, I can bring up and deploy my changed component into my own environment. I can point it to all of the current active integration services running inside my Shippable Formations, and I can fully test my new component off of the existing latest and greatest kind of fully approved services from my int environment that I've set up inside my organization. So I think what I wanted you to see from that example is just the multitude of options you have for flexibly setting up dev and test environments and very quickly getting access to them and deploying new ones. And in fact, I was going to show it to you later, but you've already seen, you know, auto deploy in action here, as well as you've seen images we created while in the CI portion of the demo already here deployed inside of Dev. So if I dive in now into these environments, I'll show you how this gets set up. When we say there's no DevOps code required in order to manage your environments and deploy your test environments, we really mean it. All that's required in order to create a formation is you define a set of components that will be eligible to be used for your environments. For your formation, and those are composed of the images that are going to be available for this particular formation to be deployed. And so in this case, you can see I have Radar API 2 and Radar WW2 available to this formation to be deployed. I can add any number of repositories here purely just by coming down here, providing the image name and giving the account credentials that I'm going to use to access those, and I can give a default set of ports that I expect to open up on those. I'm also going to define my environments that are available inside this formation. So here you can see those 4 environments that we looked at on the dashboard page. And then lastly, I'm going to define my configurations. These are configuration variables. These are global variables that are available to all of the services across all of the environments. So it makes it incredibly easy for you to manage deployments of your application across different environments and get different behavior from them. So for instance, if we go dive in to this, I should have mentioned, once you've got your base components, you now define your services, and this is where you explain and specify the combination of components that are going to be available for your particular service and when you deploy. And so let's dive into the www service here and take a look at how it's set up. So first of all, just at the top of the page is just giving me a summary of all of the instances of www service that are currently running. You noticed before that that I had 4 environments out there, and I see the status of all of those up top. You can also see here that I've got I've specified that of the available images, Radar WW2 is the one that I'm using for this service. You can also see that I specified these 4 configuration variables to be available. And you can also see that I've specified that I only want to be able to deploy this particular service into these 3 environments. And so you'll notice in the all-in-one environment that we looked at before, it wasn't running the www service. It was actually running a service called all-in-one. It used the same name that contained both of the images both of these images in a single service, whereas in this case with the dev service, or with the www service, I'm only deploying the www2 image, and I've only made it allowed to be deployed into these 3 environments. And so up above you can see, just like we saw on the previous page, you can see the current status of each of those environments. And if we jump into one of those environments and take a look at it, you now see the last stage in the setup, and this is essentially the specific deployment settings that I'm going to use to deploy a particular instance of this service. And so this is going to be the www service running in the dev environment. You can see I've got auto deploy enabled here. I've currently chosen only a single replica to be running for that. I've got port 3000 opened up, and in fact I've exposed that port externally as well, so I'm going to get an externally available IP address for that. I've specified the image that I'm using here to deploy, and I've also I provided an auto deploy tag pattern here with master.star, so that anytime any image that shows up in that repository, or anytime a tag for this image in this repo shows up that follows this pattern, it's going to be deployed. And you can see here it's telling me that I've just auto deployed master.30 as the last deployment that's occurred. And then lastly, I've set my configuration variables here. So here I've told the www service, I've told it where it can find the API service. I've also told it like in this case, I told it what level of logging I'd like. In this environment, I'd like the debug level of logging, because I'd like to see more logging. When I promote to my integration test environment, I choose a lower level of logging, like error. I've provided an environment variable so I can control things inside my application, which is why previously when you saw that I was out here in WW or in the dev environment application, I've got this extra dev mode code added to my application. But when I was in the one that was related to my test environment, no such text appears, and that's entirely being controlled and being managed because of these configuration variables. And then lastly, I can go see that service running in its environment. And here you can see you get full access to all of the logs that are running on that container and all the activity that's happening there. You can always see the status here as well. I can stop this service anytime I want to stop it. I can also go back and look at the history of all my deployments of that service, and you can see, we recently just auto-deployed master.30, but I may have decided that wasn't such a good idea. I'm not seeing the behavior I expected, and I want to roll back to the previous deployment that I had done in the past, and that's it. It's now currently going through the deploy process. It'll probably take, in this particular case, maybe 10 to 15 seconds before that's fully live and available and running back in production. So you can see, you've seen auto deploy in action, you've seen one-click rollback in action as well, and you've seen how we decide to set things up. At any time, if I decided, I can choose to redeploy a new version of any of the different versions of that are available for my image. And so if I come out here, I can see all of the available images that are out there in my repository available to deploy, and I can choose to deploy any of those that I would like, and it would, just like you just saw when I rolled back to master.29, you can see that it will spin down the existing version and spin up the new one. And so if you think about it, what we just went through and what we just saw there, in a traditional IT environment, walking through kind of that stage gauge model with multiple handoffs, every one of those handoffs, those steps throughout the process could have taken, it could take hours or days to happen. Everything, we just went through that entire end-to-end workflow, and it all just happened in a matter of minutes. And then if I wanted to control changes to any of the deployments that have happened into my dev and test labs, they were entirely in my control to do so as the developer, being able to maintain that. So when we say that everything in the dev and test areas or pre-production stages of your software delivery lifecycle should be fully controllable by your development team, by the team responsible for development activities, we really mean it. We mean that you have complete control and have full accessibility. And so I think that's going to wrap up the demo portion of this. I know I've been talking kind of straight through. I want to pause here. We've got a few minutes left and open it up. If there's any questions that anybody has, you can feel free to type those directly into the window, or you can raise your hand in the webinar console and we'll activate your microphone. All right, looks like I'm not seeing any questions come up right now, so I think I've done a fantastic job of demoing today because I've covered all of them. But again, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to attend today. I'm personally available to answer any questions and do any kind of follow-up demonstrations for your organization if you'd like. You can reach me at tom@shippable.com. Of course, you can always go to the Shippable support repo. It's a public repo on GitHub, github.com/shippable/support, and post any questions that you have about Shippable there. So once again, thank you for attending, and we hope you got all of your questions answered. We're going to sign off now. Thank you.